Well, namaskar to everyone. Today we are going to take up the next mystery, the mystery of birth. Yesterday, when we talked about the mystery of the soul and of the psychic being, there are quite many questions. And I was happy to see all those questions. It is indeed a new concept. New in the sense that the psychic being has been referred to as the Chaitya Purusha, but down the line, most of the philosophers chose to use the word only soul and Atman. That's why it was quite forgotten in our literature, philosophical literature and yoga literature. Even Sri-Aurobindo himself had in the beginning used the word soul in many of his writings. And it seems it was the mother who brought back the word psychic being because it is more precise. And because in yoga one has to be having a precision of experience. So otherwise, the soul is quite an amorphous word. It is really covering the soul spark right from matter to the higher levels. So when it comes to yoga, it's important to have a precision. That's why I suppose the mother reintroduced the word psychic being. And then, of course, when we are talking about Sri Krishna referring to the soul, when he said it is my own amsha, well, I had mispronounced it as Mamaiva amsha. It is Mamaiva, Mama Eva amsha. It's a short ma. Because you see, this is the concept that we have gotten from the Gita and later on from all the other teachers. That this divinity, that this soul goes from birth to birth. That's why Lord Krishna himself tells in chapter 15, verse number 8, when the Lord takes up this body, He brings in with Him the mind and senses. And in His going forth too, casting away the body, He goes taking them as the wind takes the perfumes from a vase. I read out this verse in my previous class too, but it applies more to today's class. And then the other verses are in chapter 2, verse number 13, as the soul passes physically through childhood and youth and age, so it passes on to the changing of the body. The self-composed man does not allow himself to be disturbed and blinded by this. Chapter 2, verse number 22. The embodied soul casts away old and takes up new bodies as a man changes worn out raiment for new. There may be other references, but I am going to take up only these three because this is going to be the summary and sum and substance of my talk today. As I told you in the beginning too, that my effort is to take up the important verses from the Gita and elaborate them in the light of Sri-Aurobindo and the Mother. You see here in chapter 15, verse number 8, where it says, when the Lord takes up the body, Lord here is nothing but the Jivatman, is not the Supreme Lord. We can directly say when the Jivatman takes up this body, he brings in with him the mind and senses. Now that's a very important addition, but which I'll explain later. And in his going forth too, he goes taking them. Taking them means taking the mind and the body and all that, and the vital, etc. Well, this has a very beautiful explanation given by the mother, Sri Aurobindo, of course, and one of his disciples, Nalikanta Gupta, also has explained this very beautifully. I have taken help of all of them. So, this explaining this verse, we can say that when a man dies, his soul or psychic being, well, generally, unless we want to be very precise, we can use the word soul or psychic being. So here I may be using soul or psychic being in a similar manner, with no changing meaning. But yet you know that I mean only the psychic being. After a time goes the psychic world and takes rest there till the hour comes to take birth again in another body upon earth. You see, yesterday we had finished the talk saying that at the time of death, the last moments, the soul takes a decision. If not a complete decision, at least it takes the orientation in what line it is going to come up in the next life. So before we come to that passage of what line is going to come up, there are two things. Once it leaves the body, its journey beyond death begins. That is the passage, as we say. You see, the soul has two passages. One, when it leaves the body, it passes on to its own world, the psychic world, or as it is called in our classical literature, Ananda Loka. Then once it goes there is a rest. But this passage that we are going to talk about is most crucial. And most of the philosophies other than Sri Aurobindo and the mother have not recognized it the way these people have done. Of course, Indian philosophy has its own way of explaining, Jaina philosophy or Buddhist philosophy, whatever. Each philosophy has its own way, definitely, I do not deny that. But as Sri Krishna tells us that in his going forth, casting away the body, he goes taking them. Now what is this meaning of he goes taking them? Precisely it is this, that you see, when the soul was in the body, or it is in the body, it is covered, if I can use the harder word, imprisoned, by three layers. I think I've sent you the diagram this morning. The diagram is clearly, you can see that the soul is rounded, is enveloped, covered, imprisoned by three layers. And the last layer is the physical, the vital and the mental. So when it leaves the body, first thing, of course, it has left the physical. And to that physical, we have all kinds of rituals and ceremonies how to discard this physical body. Each religion has its own way to discard the body, depending on their own philosophy. But what's important is not the ceremony of discarding the body, but what happens is the journey beyond death, which is very arduous, very difficult. It's not that once we see that the person has gone, we have cremated the body or buried the body and it's all over. No. It's all over for you and me, for us who are living in this physical world. We may have their memories and do rituals and all that for 12 days, 13 days, whatever you do. But the soul itself begins its journey. And there are levels and levels it has to cross. The first level is a subtle physical. And the subtle physical is the most difficult layer to pass through. Because try to imagine that there is, around the soul, there is a physical, the gross physical has gone, is discarded, but then there is a subtle physical, which is enmeshed with all the desires, with all the things, with all the habits, all the good or bad, everything is there. So to go beyond this physical, it takes time, the subtle physical. And that's why many of us, either the spouses or the children or the relatives or friends, they get dreams of this person who has passed away because he's still there in the subtle physical. He's very close. Because of that, as long as he's there in the subtle physical, he may be visiting in dreams his friends and colleagues and spouses and children, everybody. Sometimes with sorrowful cries, sometimes happily, sometimes in a tragic way, because they're very so close to those people. Then after a time, whatever the length of time, depending on how he or she has lived upon earth, so that is where we have to realize that our life in the body and life beyond the body is a continuation. It's not just that once we discard the body, it's all over. Because as Lord Krishna says, that as the soul passes physically through childhood and youth and age, so it passes on to the changing of the body. That means when we pass from childhood and youth and age, we are not three different persons. There is a continuity of my being. I know that in childhood I was like that, I was like that, in my youth I was like that, in my old age I am like this. So the continuity of the I is there. So similarly, the soul also, when it is there in the physical, it goes through a pattern of life. Then beyond that, the journey is facilitated. It becomes easy or difficult depending on what we have lived, the way we have lived in the physical. Then after a time there comes the vital body. Then there is the second circle of the vital imprisonment or the doors or the walls of the vital. That takes a very long time to disperse. Because the vital is consisted of all the desires and passions and the lower emotions. You see, we may not be, that's why the question of sadhana and yoga and remembering Godward motion, etc., that we are saying, is important not only to have a harmonious, a good, a happy, peaceful life when we are in the body, but even after we leave the body, these things that we are lived by are very important, because if we have been a man of jealousies and contempt and this kind of lower emotions and all the vulgar emotions, they become a very thick wall and they imprison the soul in its upward journey for long many months. So imagine we ourselves are responsible for the suffering of the soul in its upward journey. So it takes a long time for all these passions and emotions and relations and attachments and all desires. That's why the Lord Krishna has been telling us, be away from these desires and attachments, not only because of this, the life in the body, but also beyond the body. So it takes a long time for the physical to dismantle itself. It's only when these physical emotions and desires, attachments and all this, they get dispersed, that the soul goes to the next level. You see, there are levels and levels of worlds. We do not think that this physical world is the only thing that we have. There are layers of worlds. There's a subtle physical, there's a vital, then there's a mental. So the soul crosses onto the mental level. Once having dispersed or discarded, once it gets melted down, it's the vital level. Then when it goes to the mental level, it is there again for some time, because we have mental ambitions. We have works we thought of doing, it is incomplete. We had plans to do this and that, they're incomplete. So these are there that really disturb for a while. And then, until the mental also gets dissolved, the soul has to hang on in this world. You see, it may take months, it may take years, depending on the way we have lived here. You see how closely we are connected with the soul living in the body and the soul after it leaves the body. It's only after that there are other intermediate zones also, but still we can say that there is a gradual shedding of all the sheets, and then it goes up into its own level. And one of the things is, when it leaves these things and goes and rests on its level, what does it do on its level of Ananda Loka? We will see further. This is one of the reasons why the way it disperses its mind and its vital. Because you see, we have our memories are in our mind. But once the mental sheath is gone, there's no memory that gets stuck to the psychic being. So that's why, what was I in my previous birth? I have no idea. Because the soul also doesn't take this instrument of the memory, take it back to its its world and says, oh, these are my good memories, I was with this person, I did that. Nothing. So once it goes beyond the mental level, it has no memory at all of the previous birth. The relations, the incident, the event, the good, the bad, the jealousies, nothing. And yet, there is something that remains. There is something called the psychic memory. Would it be that there is nothing that the soul has gained in its life upon earth? No, there is something what the Mother and Sriaurobinda call as the psychic memory. You see, the psychic being is made of light and knowledge. It knows, rather it sees and can survey the whole curve of the past growth and development. Of course, it may not see or remember. Very often it does not. All the physical details of things and happenings of an earthly life, the 100 incidents, accidents, contingencies that are not directly linked to its consciousness. And this is what I call she calls as the psychic memory. But all things that I've had its touch and have contributed to its growth and development and have in their turn received its influence, objects, persons, happenings or movements find themselves harbored in the psychic memory. And thus the only sure way of remembering the past, remembering, that is to say, what is worth remembering, is to get into the psychic being, possess the psychic consciousness. So there are things that happen during the psychic being's life in the body. What she calls as, those things that have contributed to its growth and development. That means it can be a person, it can be an incident, it can be an event, it can be an object, it can be anything, or even a book, or even reading a poem or reading a book. That which has helped in its growth. Now, what do we mean by helped in its growth? That means that which really adds greater delight into the psychic being. There's a kind of a connection where it may be very simple emotions, and yet we see that there is a kind of a wonderful intensity in that. You see, it could be anything, it's not a big thing. It could be, as it is described, at the most a word, a phrase heard, just a passing scene is all that is stored, net and clear, engraved as it were. But above all, it is the soul state that is the most important thing. It is these scattered elements that serve as stepping stones or signposts on the soul's forward journey. You see, that's why when we say, live a life of consciousness, aware. So it is these things that really, sometimes you just go to the morning walk on the sea beach and suddenly look at the sunrise and say, wow, what a beauty. These little touches of beauty, little touches of, you have heard a beautiful raga and it touches you. So these inward things which have been originated in the outer things, that means a contact, as I say, it's a phrase heard, a word read, or a book done, or a passing scene. So in one word, as we said before, whatever helps the psychic being in its growth upward. So all the other things, it may be important for us. I may have a big post and a big responsibility. I am so and so of the country, of the factory, of the house. All those big positions, your wealth, nothing matters to it. It's only what has touched its emotion. And then these are the unforgettable moments, as it is said. There are also the well-known, there are some moments here which we keep recollecting. Even when we are alive, you will see if you really keep quiet and really withdraw into yourself, you will see some beautiful memories coming up. It's not just beauty and the incident and the person no. As the mother would say, it's a kind of a vibration that sticks. There's a kind of a soul vibration, a kind of an atmosphere. So these things which form the psychic memory, they are there that are carried into the psychic world. So ultimately what happens? When the soul withdraws into the psychic world recollects these psychic memories. So it is here that we see what it is doing there in the psychic world. It starts recollecting all the psychic moments. That is the treasure that it has taken from the birth, from its immediate birth. The rest of the things, it has no problem, it has no issues. But what is again important to know is that, I have mentioned yesterday also, that the psychic being can grow in its consciousness only when it has this body, when it is there on the earth. So that's why those who commit suicide thinking that they will be away from all the problems of life are the greatest criminals. They are not only harming their own physical and the vital, but also harming the psychic being. Harming in the general sense, that is, the psychic gets a kind of a shock. Because the body has been the place, the lair, the abode, where it can find its ultimate destiny, where through suffering or sorrow or whatever. Because once the body is gone, it is kind of left without any protection in this outer occult worlds, as you said, the physical, vital, etc. Then all the outer beings, the other outer forces, they come to attack it. So, and once he leaves this physical, he is obsessed and pulled back by his past, his desires, the hungers, the attractions and repulsions, the plans unfulfilled, problematic schemes, all haunt him still. Things done, things not done crowd around him and fetter his forward march. Not only his karma, but the karma of others too pursues him. All persons with whom he had relation, who think of him now, pity him, mourn for him, lament his absence, raise so many hurdles and obstacles in his path, oblige him to return and look back. Of course, this is there applicable not only to the one who has committed suicide, but even when there is a common death, a normal death, a usual death. What I said, the subtle physical is the most dangerous, is the most difficult passage. Because at that time, as I had already explained, all the memories, all the contacts, all the attachments, immediate attachment come in. But as it is mentioned, the karma of others too pursues him. This is where we as friends and relatives have to remember that if we mourn for the deceased, if we lament his absence, raise so many hurdles and obstacles in his path, oblige him to turn and look back. You see, Mother explains so beautifully. She says, when the psychic being was in the body, when somebody looks for some help, somebody cries, somebody is not unhappy, you go to the person and put a hand on the head and say, don't cry, I'm with you. You kind of console the person. But when the psychic being doesn't have a body, and we are pulling him by crying and lamenting and feeling his absence, and we say, this and that, what's happening? We are pulling him back, but the psychic says, I cannot touch you, I cannot talk to you, I cannot console you. So it's the greatest suffering for it. That's why here Mother has given us instructions not to really do all this lamenting and all this question of pitying the person who has gone away and all that. And even Lord Krishna says, the self-composed man does not allow himself to be disturbed and blinded by this death. So the living persons have a great responsibility to help the deceased to go in his passage. So we see that the body is a kind of a fortress, as it's called, a fortress par excellence for the individual being. It's not merely an ugly, dirty clothing that has to be cast off so that one may go straight to the enjoyment of the beatitude of paradise. On the contrary, it is, as it were, an armor, a steel frame that protects the subtle body against the attacks or harsh and cruel touches of other worlds and their beings. Well, we can experience this sometimes in dreams. When we have a terrifying dream, we've come across a horror. You see, the best way is that we rush back to our body. When we come back to the body, we say, oh my God, I'm so happy it was only a dream. So that is how the body is a tremendous fortress for the soul, for all, even in our dream world, in our occult world, in our world beyond death. So let us not really, discard the importance of the body and say, oh, it's nothing, tuchha, it is there, mortal, nothing like that. But as long as the psychic being is there in the physical has to be taken care of, because it is an abode. However imperfect it may be, is an abode for the psychic against the attacks of the occult world. See, there's another dimension that comes in. It's not only it has its own problems, but the body is a shelter, is an abode, is a fortress, because around us, as we have said before, there are so many vital beings, vital forces, anti-divine forces. They constantly keep attacking us. But the body being a solid one, it doesn't let these forces come in as much as possible. So that is why Mother and Aurobindo have given so much importance to the body. Not just its attractiveness, its beauty, and they try to make it attractive. No. The body itself must be healthy. Not only healthy in the sense of going to the gym and you do your gymnastics, that's fine, that's one kind of a physical health. But healthy in an integral manner, having the sense of harmony and rhythm and balance. You must be having good health and good suppleness, good swiftness, good all this. So that is an integral health, why we are doing yogasanas and all that, and pranayama and all that. So that body must be kept healthy not only for its own self, but so that it is a kind of a protection to the psychic being itself. And we have seen this, that how in the dream world we come back. Now we have to take up a next line, coming back to what Lord Krishna has told us in our yesterday's quotation, that when we think of in the last minutes, the lasting minute, the desires, the wish of before the death. Well, that is again, as we said, is very, very important. Because an easy and quick passage to the place of rest, that is what the being needs and asks for after death. You see, every being, once it leaves the body, wants to go to its world as fast as possible. But there are so many impediments, the physical, the vital, the mental. But here, as Lord Krishna tells us, there are two things. This is determined by one's karma in life and the last wish and prayer at the moment of death. For the force of consciousness at this critical moment acts not only upon the character of the passage, but also upon the character even of the next birth. Well, you see, again and again, the same thing comes back, that a person dies in an accident, for example, or a person dies in a sickness he himself was not expecting to die. There's a kind of, he may be surprised that am I so ill that I'm dying, I'm going to die. He may not even think about it. Kind of death overrides and the body succumbs. And even before he could pray, he could think, even the soul, before the soul can decide what it wants to do next life, if it succumbs, if it's a death, then this last minute wish of the psychic being is missing, and that's why the soul can suffer more. That's why a person not has to think about death, but the last minute, if he realizes something is happening to me, there must be this moment of the prayer, the decision for the next birth. So here, it takes the next birth, and how does it take the next level? This is where the question of the descent, the rebirth, the taking the form comes in. Well, one thing let me add before I take up the process of the birth itself. Apart from one's own merit, one can be helped by others also who are still upon earth and who claim to be his friends and relatives and well-wishers, not in the way they think they do at present, that is to say, by grieving and lamenting, or even by performing rites and ceremonies. Those often retard rather than accelerate the passage. I've already explained. But what I want to focus on here is the performing rites and ceremonies. We in India have this custom, we have to do 12th day, 13th day, and then after the annual anniversary, after 1 year, we take him to this Ganga or that. We go and do some pujas. All kinds of things are there, rituals. But these only retard rather than accelerate the passage. And then Mother would say, what is important is but an inner detachment and calm prayer and goodwill. So we who are left behind, or those who are left behind the deceased person, the deceased person can be helped to go forward in his psychic journey by prayer and goodwill and inner detachment. So as long as we are attached, sometimes in terminal illnesses, the persons close to the person who is going to pass away, they must detach themselves, saying, no, so and so, you can go away now. We are detached, we don't belong to you, you don't belong to us, you are on your upward march, you can go. So there has got to be a conscious detachment, and this detachment will help when it comes to its own return place. Now, once it goes to its place, once in its place of rest, the soul enjoys profound peace and delight, and is in a kind of luminous sleep. There it assimilates all the experiences of its last life. That is to say, imbibes out of them all the substance that goes to increase and strengthen its consciousness, the sap that lends itself to the growth of the build and stature of the being. These experiences are meant to bring the soul nearer to the fullness of its union with the divine consciousness, out of which it came originally upon earth as a mere spark, a parcel yet apart. Now, this is where I would like to take up the next portion of my talk, the preparation for it to come back and take a birth. Because you see, when it is there on its level, it's not just ruminating and it's not just in sleep. After the required rest, so-called luminous sleep, it starts preparing. That means it has to see a broad plan is there, a scheme in outline of the kind of experiences that one will need for the particular growth of consciousness envisaged. Some forces of consciousness out of the stock developed and assembled by the being are kept back. You see, when it starts preparing, now the first thing it says is, what should be my next life? So what is this preparation? We see here, how does it prepare, for example? A psychic being, for example, needed the experience of power, authority, command, and wanted to know the reactions of these movements and also how to turn them towards the divine, to learn, in a word, what things can teach. So the soul took the body of a king or a queen. When it had the necessary experience, learned what it had to learn, it gave up the body, being no longer useful. You see, it's just an example to show us that the psychic being wants to have a particular experience. Say the experience, as we said, about this, the experience of the king. Then, that means this royalty, this question of command, this question of power, it wants to choose the shortcut. Which form in the world would give him that example, that experience of royalty, of riches, of wealth and all that? It's not that it's always looking for that. It may be the soul says, no, I think I would like to have a different experience. So for that it may even be a beggar or a rich man or just a farmer or anything. What it wants is not only the form, but what is more important is the experience. So it says, at that moment when it decides to leave the body, that the soul still in the body makes the choice of the next experience. The choice very often takes a course of action and reaction. If the soul has experienced and studied a particular field, its choice falls upon a contrary field on the following occasion. A very, very crucial sentence which most of the people do not understand. You see, it is not that because it was a poor person in this life, it becomes a rich person. No. Whatever it is, it takes an opposite. If you are a rich person, next life it doesn't mean you become richer. You can be a beggar, you can be a carpenter, you can be a farmer, you can be something. So it doesn't follow a sequence of rich and more rich and more rich. Because the wealth, the soul is not wanting to have only a wealthier life, more happy life. What it wants is how best and how in a shortcut it can go towards the divine unification. So thus if the soul has had the experience of a kingly position and worked through that to enter into a conscious relation with divine, then at that moment of leaving the body, served with power and authority and command, it perhaps would say, this time I shall take a middle position, neither high nor low, where there will be no need to lead mostly an external life, where one is neither in great luxury nor in great misery. Well, we all know the famous example of the mother herself, when she was the Queen Elizabeth. Towards the end she said, in my next birth I don't want to be in this royal, demand royal life. Because it's a life where it's a completely external life, always surrounded by people, you are not left alone for yourself. So it seems the mother had decided that she will become a commoner in her next life. So that's how we can think that one can be an opposite life, one can lead a life where one wants to experience oneself, but the essential part of the experience is how best to go to the divine, how best to express the divine. And therefore she says that when the time comes for return upon earth, for the descent into a physical body, it remembers naturally the choice it made. You see, we also said before it left the body, it had chosen something. So that memory comes back and it says, oh, I thought of doing this in my next life, being born here or being born there or being this country or that religion or that caste. You see, that is one of the reasons why the mother would say that why are we people hating each other, hating each other's religions, hating each other's caste and all that. It may be that in my previous birth I was a Muslim or I was a Christian or I was this life it happens to be that I am a Hindu. But next life I could be again a Christian or a Muslim or somebody or some other religion or some other caste. So for the soul there is no difference of caste and creed and religion and all that. It's we the man-made people who have done these divisions and which obstruct in fact the growth of the soul. So mother would tell us, do not have this external enmity and religion and all that differences and which hamper our growth. So the soul, what it does when it remembers the choice it has made in the previous life, one has not a vision of the details but a total or a global vision is there. It can choose an atmosphere, it can choose even a particular country, it has in view a certain kind of education, civilization and influence, the kind of life that it wishes to lead. Then it comes down and looks about, it distinguishes very clearly the different kinds of vibrations and makes its way accordingly. It aims, as it were, at the place where to draw. This is a very important thing, that when it is planning, it really precisely points out where, which house, which family, which parents is going to choose. So that is the complete precision with which it comes down. But of course there are occasions, the mother says, if the parent has some aspiration or receptivity, something that is sufficiently passive and open and looking up towards something higher, in that case the thing appears to the psychic being as a luminous vibration which beckons it. So there is a kind of a response. The soul is looking for an experience, and the mother, especially the mother, the would-be mother, is aspiring for a particular kind of a soul, a particular kind of a child. So this corresponds to each other. So the soul says, okay, somebody, that womb, that mother, that lady is aspiring for such a soul. Maybe I am also wanting to have that kind of an experience. So there is a kind of a correspondence of luminosity, and it comes into that womb. It is the answer to its will. It shows the place it is to go. It cannot fix the day of its birth. There will naturally be a period of uncertainty, but that is not expected to go beyond a year. The second factor that somewhat modifies or qualifies is coming from the nature of the birth itself. So this is something that we need to go a little deeper later on. But what it means is that when the soul comes into the womb of the mother, it kind of descends into inconscience. You see, the womb of the would-be mother is after all physical. And this physical body is full of inconscience and tamas and all that. It may be, you may say, the womb is very live, active, and it is growing. All that, all medical is fine. But the consciousness of the womb itself is of tamas, is of inconscience. So when the supreme consciousness of the divine, the Jivatman, comes down, the psychic being comes down, and there is a contact between the consciousness and the inconscience, there is a kind of a, as the mother explains, there is a kind of such a shock The entry of the psychic being into the womb is a kind of a shock experience, and therefore it gets into an oblivion. And in the beginning it doesn't know why it came into this womb. Therefore, the mother would say, all kinds of experiences, circumstances, happenings, experiences, external and emotional, are then needed to strike open the doors within to bring the memory that one has come from elsewhere and for a very special reason. Is the normal, longer process. But one may have the chance of meeting early enough someone who knows. Then instead of groping and fumbling through ignorance and darkness, you get the light and help that give you the swift and straight contact. That is a rare thing. But of course, if you are lucky, you come across a person, you come across a book, you come across some teachings, you come across some incidents. Sometimes the incidents are very rough, very violent, very sad, tragic. But these are there to really reawaken you and to say, hey, I've come for this kind of an experience and not this usual mumbo jumbo earning and living and spending and all that. So this, she says, this is also very important, but this is the experience that the soul goes through. And then we have a further, really the process. Somebody was also asking the question, when the soul comes into the womb. Well, there are several points, several periods when it comes. If the incarnation takes place at the conception, as the mother explains, the whole formation of the child to be born is directed and governed by the consciousness which is going to incarnate. The choice of the elements, the attraction of the substance, a choice of the forces, and even a substance of the matter which is assimilated. This is one time. When the soul, the psychic being, comes at the time of the conception. Well, once it comes at the time of the conception itself, then it is that soul which takes over the formation of the womb, the formation of the substance of the womb, the consciousness of the womb. Well, there are many, many stories about this. You may have heard about all the great rishis and the great people. We know very beautifully about the Buddha. But again, in our own case, we know even about the mother. That when she was in the womb, it is these four great aspects of the Divine Mother who really, or the Mahasaraswati aspect, who came and really worked upon the womb, the consciousness. So that is to say, at the time of conception, not only the soul, but even the divine personalities, they came to formulate her womb. So this is one period, very rare one, it doesn't happen to all, at the time of conception that the soul or the psychic being comes in. More frequently, there are cases in which just at the moment of its birth, that is to say, of its first gesture of independence, when the child begins to develop its lungs by crying as much as it can, at that moment, very often, this sort of call from life makes the descent easier and more effective. So now we know the second part. Second level is when the first cry of the baby is there. It's a kind of, it's a cry for the soul. It's not just a cry for the lungs, as the doctors would say. Well, fine. But this cry is a kind of an invitation, a crying for the soul to come in. So that's the second level. Sometimes days and at times months pass, and preparation is slow, and the entry takes place very gradually, in quite a subtle and almost imperceptible way. So that is, sometimes it comes after months together. It's not just after conception or just the birth, but it takes months together for the psychic being to come in. Sometimes it comes much later, when the child itself becomes a little conscious and feels a very subtle but very real relation with something from above, far above, which is like an influence pressing upon it, and then it can begin to feel the need of being in contact with something which it does not know. You see, there are different levels, some after months, some after years, some at the time of birth, some at the level of conception. So these are the different timings where the soul really comes and takes possession of the body. And it seems, she would say, that the soul which wants to incarnate stays at times in a domain of the higher mind, quite close to the earth, having chosen its future home. Or else it can descend further into the vital, and from there have a more direct action. Or again it can enter the subtle physical and very closely govern the development of its future body. See, these are lucky people, lucky birth, where the soul really, when the psychic being descends from its Ananda Loka, comes to the mental level, the region of the mental level. And then sometimes it comes to the next lower level, the vital, next it comes to the subtle physical, closely seeing the shaping of the body, so that there are no defects in the child at the womb or the child that is going to take over, take up. So it's a kind of a inspecting the formation of the womb itself. So these are all different cases. So we cannot say exactly in which child which has taken place, but these are the ways. Then the last portion that I have little time, the important thing is, when it returns, on its return journey, it picks up, it takes up, as it is said, and the element, like Lord Krishna himself says here, that it is going forth too, and he goes taking them as the wind takes them, but he brings back the mind and the senses. The mind and the senses, so it brings this mind and the vital and the subtle physical as its instruments needed for this particular birth and experience. It brings them from the universal storehouse of Earth's atmosphere as it needs them, in the same way as it returns them there on the journey back after death. So this is the way that the psychic being gathers its own body, its own mind, its own vital, its own physical. Sometimes the mother there says that it is in a kind of a rush to come in. Now, what is that rush? Let me explain. One of the most important points of this soul's birth, the psychic birth, the soul coming down, is that there is always a grouping of the souls, grouping of the psychic beings. This is a new concept that we get in Sri Aurobindo Mother, that we have seen that there is a grouping, and then this grouping, some souls come together and they come down for a particular purpose. So it is not that they come at random times, anybody is born anywhere just like that. It's not the question of somebody is being born, somebody is not being born. But there is more or less, it's not that every child born has to belong to a family. But more or less, there is a kind of a grouping of souls, a family of souls. And this happened very, very clearly. Say, for example, in the time of the Renaissance, suddenly we see a beautiful birth of dozens of great artists and musicians and sculptors and architects and all that. It was a time period when this grouping of souls came together for a particular mission upon earth. And so was it, Sri Aurobindo or the mother mentions, that when it came to the period of independence movement in India, now suddenly so many great souls have come in. They would sacrifice their life, they would do this and they would do that, what not. But these are not common souls. These are souls that have come for a particular period, for a particular purpose. And so they do their work and go. So this grouping of the souls is also a very major idea. And that is why sometimes it also happens that there is a particular group of souls who come for a particular to a particular guru, to a particular acharya, to a particular ashram. So why is it that we are all not moving into different ashrams? Now maybe our group of souls has decided to really work for the Mother Sri Aurobindo. So we are all gathered here in time earlier or later or even that in the time future. So there could be different groupings. But definitely there is a choice. So that is why now I realize when somebody asks the mother, did we meet in a previous, how is it that we are all gathered here today when you are here, when you are come? She says, because we have already met in our previous lives. So those of us who have met the mother in her previous life, we have regathered into her group in order to serve her. It's not the question of we have not seen her, it doesn't matter. So some have been able to see her, some have not seen her, but that is not crucial for our growth. But what is important is, those who have turned to Sri Aurobindo the Mother belong to a kind of a psychic group. And that is what is keeping us together. So there is no question of some people going to this guru or that guru or this religion or that guru. So there is a kind of a mass movement. And here we have, in the groupings itself, there could be gradations of groupings. You see, we have seen before in the first talk where I mentioned about the 4 aspects of the divine. The 4 aspects that we know, of course, all of us know. The question of Mahalakshmi, Maheshwari, etc. So we have these 4, Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi and Mahasaraswati. And also on the male side we have Mahavira, Balarama, Pradyumna and Aniruddha. Those are the 4 original, the highest souls, or the highest being, not the souls. And each of these, aspects of the divine, they produce their own souls, they produce their own groups of souls. So that is why what happens, those souls which have come down, some of them only go to Mahalakshmi. I mean, they are the aspect of harmony. So it's not the question of Jat and all that they are innately attracted to the question of harmony. There are others who are which is innately attracted to the question of perfection in work. There are others who are innately attracted to wisdom and knowledge. Others attracted to like the Kshatriya group, the valor of the hero. So these are not classification, as we said, Brahman, Kshatriya, is not that. It's a particular consciousness that comes within us. And so we are there as part of this group, the gradations of this group, and wherever we are, we belong and we really work for the manifestation of that particular consciousness. So that is where we see how there is a birth of the soul, the process of the soul, the grouping of the soul, and then the psychic being, when it comes back, it gets back its own instrumentation. Sometimes it is said it drops down so fast that it doesn't bother about the exactness, the correctness of the instrument. So that's why some people, although they have a high mission, the physical is weak or the vital is weak or the mental is weak, but they are saying, no, I'm supposed to do this work. So there is a kind of a disparity, not in all the births, there's a perfect harmony between the physical, the vital and the psychic ambition or the psychic aim. So there could be some disparity. But whatever it is, those are exceptions. But this is in general the descent of the soul, the descent of the psychic being. So what we have seen is the way it goes up, the journey upward, and in its return journey, while it was going up, it left behind the vital and the mental and all that. But when it comes down, it gathers once again the universal storehouse, the mental. But there's one more point that we need to think about is that those minds or those vitals or those physicals which have worked so hard and have been touched by the psychic being. Say somebody is a great scholar, somebody is a great artist, somebody is a great musician. But through that music, if that person has been in touch with the psychic being. So what we say, that mind or that physical or that heart, the emotional vital being, they crystallize, they get crystallized. And so when the soul is wanting to go up, these mind and vital, subtle physical, they do not disperse. They remain as crystallized human minds. And well, I don't want to give lots of examples, I know. But these minds or these artists, vital beings, they remain in the universal storehouse, as she says. And when the psychic being comes, sometimes it recognizes, yeah, this is the mind I had worked with in my last life. So it can take back that mind and comes with a new purpose. And that's what explains the multiple personalities of some people. Like, for example, the great Leonardo da Vinci. He was an artist, he was a sculptor, he was this, he was that, everything. Because he had gathered from the previous births this kind of a perfect mind, a great artistic vital mind, a great physical. So these are the reason why sometimes we have a multiple personality. It's not just I'm expert in one thing, but I'm good in many things. That because I'm good in many things, it shows that in my previous births I've had some kind of an impact which has come back in this birth. So that's why sometimes we say, this person is writing such good poetry because he was such and such poet in his past life. So such things happen. Such things can come back in our present life. Well, friends, this is the whole general thing. But yes, as I was referring to you about the mother's previous births, I think there's a little mistake. The last birth of the mother was Queen Catherine of Russia, not Elizabeth. The Queen Catherine of Russia. So I think it's there she takes the vow that I'll be born as a common person. However, that's a little detail. I wanted to correct myself. So this is the long journey of the descent, the birth of the soul, the birth of the psychic being. So all this explanation I've given only based on these 3 verses that I've taken from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 13, chapter 2, verse 22, chapter 15, verse 8. So this is how you see each of these verses has such great depth, and we can go on for hours to talk about it. And as I told you in the beginning itself, that I'm taking the seed verses from the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, and the seed ideas which have been elaborated, explained in many ways by other authors, but of course I take to Mother and Sri Aurobindo, which gives us the most satisfying and then most wonderful psychological and philosophical and spiritual dimensions. All the 3 dimensions are brought out so beautifully by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. That is how we fulfill the Bhagavad Gita in the best manner in Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Because many other commentators have given one side, the moral side, the ethical side, the psychological side. But here in the essays on the Gita that Sri Aurobindo has written, we have this integral approach to the Bhagavad Gita. Integral not only in the 3 parts, but also integral the psychological, the philosophical, the rational, even the spiritual. So that's why we'll stick to this path, and maybe tomorrow we'll take up one more mystery. We have still a couple of more mysteries, but today was the soul and the birth, and obviously after the birth, the mystery that is going to come tomorrow. You can guess what it is. I hope these complex ideas I've been able to put across in a manner that you could grasp a little bit. But still, you have questions, you will have questions, you ought to have questions, because this is a very complex philosophy. It needs more and more reading. That's why instead of explaining to you your questions that you sent me yesterday, I sent back to you some of the charts that I prepared. I sent you the clippings or the daily pages, because I want you to read the Sri Aurobindo and the Mother original explanations, which really are grand explanations. So if I were to explain, I would be doing injustice to them. So I hope you read them whenever you get time and benefit and get the answers to all your questions. Well, Tompi, thanks a lot. See you again tomorrow.